Welcome to Profit Sharing in the Real World. I'm your host, Danny Murphy. This podcast features commentary from Dick Erickson, the founder of Sun Tire in North Florida and author of the book, Profit Sharing in the Real World, which is available at Amazon.com. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about minority stock ownership versus profit sharing. And we're also going to talk about the difference between profit sharing and an employee stock ownership program. And first, I want to say welcome to the show, Dick.
Thank you, Danny. Good to be here.
So early in your career, you had an opportunity to join a company where you got minority ownership in a tire store. Tell me about that.
Thank you. I was 27 years old, just finished school. I'd already been through my Marine Corps experience, chopper pilot and all that. And here I was coming into the tire industry, but I did a little homework on these owners, and these guys had a great company the way it looked. And I said, this looks like a great opportunity. How does it work? Is there a chance? So when I interviewed, they said they had a deal where you could get into on the ownership of the store that you built. They built a new store, and you'd get a percentage. So what was it? Well, it happened to be 21%. It was an accounting issue that for the IRS, why they owned less than 80%. If I owned 21, so it helped their tax bases, and I liked the idea of just having ownership in something that I was building.
And you found out that there were a few disadvantages to stock ownership, minority stock ownership.
What happened, Dan, is I was with the company for 10 years, and it was a great company. I can't complain about it. I cut my teeth in, as the saying goes, in this industry with this people for 10 years. So I learned the tire business with this group. And what happened is I grew with them. I put in a second store and then a third store. So I then had a 3-store corporation now and 21% of the total thing. So when I got to the point that I came to the point that it looked like for me to continue growing, I needed to exit their organization. It was a big family company, and that's a different issue. But anyhow, I just felt I probably was the time to break away and start my own company. So when I got down and got into talking about getting out, how do I get my money for what that 21% of that corporation's worth? And here's the dilemma. In a small company, and probably all companies, if you're growing and you're successful, you never have an excess amount of cash. You're using that to grow your business, and you're still sharing, or in some ways, of certain things going on. But anyhow, there's never an excess amount of cash. So when someone wants to sell stock in that deal, he's at their mercy of usually the majority stockholders of buying your stock back. Well, they're not a lot of times, unless you were failing, they're not real wild about buying anyone back, because that was someone that was helping them grow their company. So anyhow, the reckoning comes in is, how do I get this done? So I found that was not the value of that stock, as we say what stock's worth. It's a multiple of earnings usually. But when you get selling like this, a lot of times, too bad, you're just going to sell at best many, many times book value. Only when it says in the book, if it's worth that. Where if it was 3 times earnings or something, or 10 or whatever it was, could be, it'd be a bigger number. So here you are, you're trying to sell, and finally you end up getting your money out, but at a minimal amount. So when people say stock, and what stock usually resonates is that I'll grow with the company and someday it'll be worth a lot more than it is today. Well, that sounds good until you, in a small company, you decide to sell out. You'll get what the book value, they call it, and sometimes better if you have an agreement. But most of them do not have agreements of how you get your stock out. So after that experience, I had a bad taste in my mouth about minority stock in a small company.
Well, there's another thing about minority ownership or stock ownership in a small company. What if something happens? What if there's a lawsuit? What if there's an EPA issue that devalues the company. That's going to affect the value of whatever you've got.
Right. And remember, you're in a minority basis, so you're kind of at the mercy again of the majority stockholders. So those two issues or three issues are very much an issue that could impact what your stock's worth. Another thing that people forget, and I ran into this on an outside investment I was working on once, was buying in on a minority stock deal. And before I got it all put together, I finally said, what if we get this thing cranking like we feel we can, and we got a buy-sell agreement. So if you want to leave, I get a chance to buy your stock first, whatever value you put on it. And if I turn it down, and that becomes the problem, all of a sudden you put a value, and I'm saying that's excessive. I don't think I want to do that. The problem is, so he finds someone that is, and guess what? That person's a stranger to me. I've been in there a lot of times. I might be the operator. These owners are over here with majorities, and I have a whole new ownership person running the company. And so the more I got into it, I said, this is not as good a deal for the worker, the person in there who's really making things happen day in and day out. So what's the deal? And the deal to me was, we're going to share profits.
So stock ownership in a minority stock ownership in a small privately held company is really just for a handful of people at the top. It's not for the people on the front lines.
Well, yes and no. I mean, even for those guys on the top, they could be minority stockholders too at a small company. But what happens, I don't know of many that share stock with the guys that are on the ground level. And so that guy's being left out many, many times. So you take care of your vice president and whatever, your key administrative people and stuff like that. So I just didn't encompass the whole company the way I feel profit sharing could be. And then when I saw the Schwab model and stuff like that, and I said, hey, someone's figured this one out.
So when you saw how well it worked, profit sharing for Les Schwab Tire, you studied their program and incorporated a lot of their practices into what you were doing because you felt that was a way to motivate people at every level of the company.
Absolutely. If I could describe what I witnessed the first time I went out there, I couldn't believe. I said, well, this store, I mean, it was kind of over the top, such as a little thing said you might not think this big deal, but before I got my car stopped practically, here's someone stand beside me and ask me if you could help me. I'm going, you got to be kidding me. Well, guess what? I was out on the West Coast, and before I got through with my visit out there over a 2-3 day, I hit every store I went into, they were doing this. Every store. So that was one little thing, but I thought, what makes people do this? Why? How could this guy was changing a tire 2 minutes earlier, and he runs out and meets me at the deal. Now, what's happened to that tire? But it was so quick, and he passed me to someone inside, and he said, that's Joe at the counter there, and he's waiting on you. He's waiting on someone right now, but you'll be next in line, blah, blah. So he got it put together for me, and I moved on with his instructions. So, but the thing that I found was just the energy level in those stores, that store and then other stores, and it was consistent in all the stores. What makes people do this? I had a key folks with me one time on one of my visits, and I made many visits, over 19 years, to this organization to see what makes this happen. Well, after a few years, I started figuring out what I felt was the key to this, and because in the puzzle, there's 4 or 5 major points in a business, but what most of them don't have is a complete profit sharing. And that was the one thing that stood out. And I thought, my goodness, well, how do you do it? Well, and you could do it in different ways. They happen to do it 50% of the profits went to the employees. Down the deal. They could just about figure out their bonus on a daily basis when the numbers came in off the computer and said, okay, we made this kind of profits today. If that continues through the month, and where's that going to be month ending? So profit sharing was the thing that differentiated it. There was other things but it brought them all together. They were all teammates on an equal basis. A little bit difference on how they got paid, but they all got a piece of the extra money that was left over from after getting the business to continue growing.
Now, some people equate stock ownership with profit sharing, including plans called employee stock ownership plans, which is very different from profit sharing and even different from minority ownership at a small company. I just want to differentiate for listeners who don't know that. It's a big difference from profit sharing.
Yes. Well, here's the difference that I found, because I looked at an ESOP. They're called ESOPs, employee stock option programs. What happened, and so I said, I need to check this out, because it's set up by the government how this can do it, because you get tax benefits for doing this, and it's set up to help the people that are put the business together and that are staying and stuff like this, and it also helps the guy come out of it and get a little tax break. I don't remember the numbers, but all that's available for people to check. Here's the problem that I ran into. I went out to actually, it was a company in North Dakota where I grew up, and this company's got a great ESOP program up there. And I knew a couple of the key guys who were fraternity brothers of mine that worked in there, but one of the owner's son was in my fraternity. So I had a firsthand knowledge of, and showed him my company as much as I could without him coming down. I don't think he came down, but he knew about my company from me talking to him. And finally he said, Dick, I don't think you're set up to do an ESOP. And I said, well, why is that? He said, because you don't have enough middle management. You have a very lean company, which has helped you become very profitable. But the problem is, if you take the ESOP and you come out of it, who's going to run the company? You have enough depth in management to continue this on the trajectory that you have going now. And so he said, I'm telling you, don't do it. Because he was very, I appreciate his honesty. He had nothing to gain other than give me his, take time did nothing to gain really, other than as a friend, give me his thoughts. And so the more I studied that, I said, yeah, that might be a problem. I had some young guys there, but were they, here I'm leaving, I could potentially leave with 35 years of experience in doing this. And the guy that's following me has 5 or 6 in that upper. Is that enough experience to keep us on track?
You've been listening to Profit Sharing in the Real World. Dick Erickson's book of the same name is available at Amazon.com. If you have a question for Dick to address in a future episode, or if you have a story about how you've seen profit sharing work in the real world, please send an email to me, Danny Murphy. The email address is danny@successstory.biz. Thank you for listening.